Hello, BookTube. I went once again this morning early to the shop up the street for the New York Sunday Times. It's a habit that I've been doing for a while now. I did it all summer, and boy, oh boy, have I enjoyed it. I have enjoyed it. It plus the Christian Science Monitor, where I review books, but where I also read. I also read the Monitor. Have allowed me to dampen the frenetic tempo of 24-hour news bit intake that we're all attached to, and that is so unhealthy. It doesn't allow time for reflection, and it never stops. So you can feel burned out, and that's not a good way to approach the news of your own day. So I went early, like I mentioned last week. I've figured out that if I go early enough so that the shop is open and the paper is assembled, because the shopkeep has to assemble the paper. It doesn't come that way. And the New York Sunday Times has 10 or 12 sections to it. So it takes a bit of time to do even a small stack of them. I think he gets 5. That takes a bit of time to put those all together and make sure that you've made a presentable paper out of each one. So I like to go early enough so I give him time to do that, but still early, so early that crazy people have not come out of the woodwork in unending numbers. And I'm clearly not the only person who has figured out the rationale that I wish I'd figured it out earlier. Because I've noticed that early in the morning there are a large number of people coming in and out of that shop, and they're all normal. They're all normal. They're all the normal kind of people you could nod and say hi to 35 years ago, before American society, American streets, American stores, American malls, American sidewalks, American escalators became just crammed with crazy people. With people who, not crazy in the sense of, oh my God, 2 shots of espresso latte or whatever, but crazy in the sense of disassociative, potentially violent, in a fantasy land, not aware of where they are, deeply substance abusing or whatever. A huge percentage of the people that you see in a normal day in America are like that. And going to the shop early allows me to avoid them. And oh my, this morning, in addition to avoiding the crazy people, I also got an absolute treat. There's a guy in my neighborhood, an older guy who has 2 retired racing greyhounds, 2 big, gorgeous greyhounds, that you see him walking regularly. They don't go on long walks. Retired racing greyhounds, despite the fact that they run when they're impressed into slavery, don't particularly like to exert themselves. They're couch potatoes. And I saw him come into the shop while I was getting my stuff, and I thought, oh, isn't that odd? I don't think I've ever seen him without his dogs. And I said hello to him. I said goodbye to the shopkeep. I walk outside, and I see that he has leashed his dogs outside the shop. They're waiting for him to finish. So for the first time ever, I got a chance to say hello to them without him there and without my dogs there. Malin, my old pointer, used to hate all dogs except Lucy, my old basset hound. So she would launch herself into a frenzy when she saw these 2. And Lucy didn't notice one way or another, didn't have any idea at all. And Frida, bless her, she's a wonderful dog, and she has no aggression in her at all, but she's very pushy. She likes to get right up into the face of other dogs, not challenging them, just because she's never learned boundaries. She's never learned how to behave with anybody. So this was a chance for me to meet these 2 without anybody present but us. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I got down to their level, and they sort of loom over to you very quietly. I don't know if you've ever met a retired racing greyhound, but it's like meeting a giraffe, not a dog. And it was wonderful. I pressed my face into their faces. I pressed my face into their fur, which you can't do that with humans watching. Humans are so weird about their dogs. You just can't do it. The human seeing that is not in any way going to concentrate on, oh wow, my dog is really enjoying that. Instead, they're going to say, I'm not enjoying that. And this is a toy or a possession of mine, so I come first. I don't know if this guy would have reacted that way, but I got to just avoid it completely. Instead, I squatted down and said, hello, babies. Oh, and then we smooched and cuddled and canoodled for a good solid minute, until I could hear that he was ready to come outside. And then I stood up and got all professional again and walked off. That was wonderful. Wonderful. But then I came back and fixed myself some breakfast and read the paper from front to back. And I thought we'd go through it. And of course, the chewy Tootsie Roll center, the great treat in the center of every New York Times Sunday review, is the book review. The New York Times Sunday book review, I have it here somewhere in this mess, yes, is the sort of the sine qua non of the book reviewing world, for good or ill. Usually ill, but because nobody's faster to jump on a bandwagon. than the New York Sunday Times book review, and that can be bad. But nevertheless, I saved that for last. I read the rest of it first. So I thought we'd go through some of those things, starting with the front section. In the front section, the front and center, the big story, and boy, oh boy, is it big! It's 10,000 words long. It's like 5 full pages as you jump to the followers. Is about the fire at Notre Dame and the noxious chemicals that were released by the fire into the surrounding neighborhood with very little, I guess, follow-up being done. There's a graphic of spikes in all sorts of health irregularities in the area of Notre Dame in the wake of the fire. Last thing on earth I would have thought of. Made fascinating reading, although there was an aggrieved tone throughout it that I'm not sure I understand. What was... I guess maybe the aggrieved tone is that the French government could be acting faster or more aggressively about this. I don't know. But there were a couple of other things that were of interest on the front page. I will try not to play I told you so. I will try not to do that, although I was completely right last Sunday when we saw a story about how Donald Trump had arranged to have the Taliban at Camp David on the anniversary of 9/11, and that he peremptorily, high school girl style, tweeted that, no, they killed a serviceman, so I don't want to do it anymore. The negotiations are off. And I read that story. That was all that was known at the time, and I thought, well, that is obviously a lie. He doesn't care about an individual American serviceman who got killed at all. He certainly doesn't care about the hundreds that got killed because he dodged the draft. Instead, it has to be that something about that meeting went wrong, and he's lying about it in order to make himself look good, and that turned out to be exactly true. There's another thing it's a much older I told you so. I haven't actually told you so on this channel. One of the main stories on the front page here, the title is, For California, Liberal Policies at Warp Speed. Trump Agenda Inspires a State of Resistance. And the article is by Tim Arango, Thomas Fuller, and Jose Del Real. And it's about how California is enacting a whole spate of legislation on the state level to counter national legislation. So, ending for-profit prisons, expanding medical coverage for undocumented immigrants, all sorts of things that are exactly counter to the xenophobic, racist, fascist policies that are being made in Washington. And the article hints that other states are also following suit. It, of course, won't be all other states. California has an advantage that a couple of other states in the Union have. For those of you who don't live in America, California has the advantage of having a world stage, a world-level economy. California is like the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world, just California. So they have a certain amount of autonomy and a certain amount of voting cohesion. A state government that enacts all sorts of enlightened liberal policies is not going to face a lot of resistance in town. They're not going to face a lot of ingrown resistance. So California can essentially act like its own nation when it comes to countering national policies. And the I told you so here is that I was against the federal government from the very beginning. The federal government makes rules that states have to obey and has steadily, over the last 50 years, been eroding the state's legal ability to ignore those rules and make rules of their own. More and more power has been concentrated in the last 50 years into the federal government and specifically into the executive branch than anyone on either side of the federalism debate in 1780 would have thought was wise. So I'm hoping, I guess is what I'm saying, I'm hoping that the triumphalist note that these writers put into this story, I hope they're aware that it cuts both ways. And that a state that, Bean, what is the matter? If you want to go up there, just jump up there. You don't need a running head start. You're not in the Olympics. You're a strange little dog. Something about the floor, the smooth boards of the floor, saps her confidence when it comes to jumping up on things in this room. She's perfectly happy to do it everywhere else. But in this room, she needs to work up her courage, or she needs me to encourage her. Otherwise, she can't get up on her perch, any of her usual perches. Anyway, I hope the writers of this piece... There you go. Good girl. I hope the writers of this piece know that if California can enact more enlightened liberal policies in defiance of the federal government, then, hypothetically, if there were an enlightened liberal government in Washington, Texas or Florida could enact harsher policies on the state level. We're not going to have to worry about that because there's never going to be a liberal government in the United States again. There's never going to be a forward-looking progressive government in the United States again. There's never, and in fact, my money would be on the fact that after 2020, there's never going to be an elected, constitutional government in the United States again. I don't remember where I first heard the liberal sort of tagline: "When people tell you who you are, believe them." But Donald Trump has been telling us who he is for, well, those of us who have been following him for 45 years, but the general American electorate for 3 years. And for the last 1 year, at almost every rally, in almost every press conference, he has made a not passing at all, but very pointed reference to staying in office. Not just ignoring an election, but even if he wins the election in 2020, to staying in office in 2024. To just sticking around, to just being in power. And he's not capable of joking. He doesn't have a sense of humor. So, anyway, that was the one story that was of interest. And the other story that's of interest is ongoing. It is unfolding. I guarantee you, it's unfolding, just like last week. And it is by Ben Hubbard, Palko Karatz, and Stanley Reed. And the headline is: Saudi oil supply is put in danger by drone strikes. Pompeo, that's Secretary Mike Pompeo, points to Iran. One thing that I want to stress before we dig into just the first two paragraphs of this story, especially for those of you who maybe aren't up on American politics, Donald Trump desperately wants to be the greatest president in history. He's already said that he is. He started out saying in the first 3 weeks of his presidency, he said we've done more in 3 weeks than any president's ever done in even two or even 4 terms in office. He said then he grudgingly said maybe Abraham Lincoln is a greater president than me, but nobody else, including reporters were stunned. This was still fairly new. Reporters were stunned and said, are you saying that you're a better president than Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times and got the country through World War II and out of the Great Depression? And Trump unabashedly says yes. And now all of those limitations are gone. And not only are they gone in his mind, he doesn't even exclude Lincoln or Washington anymore. He just says he's the greatest president who's ever been or ever could be in American history. Now, not only does he say that, that is now a standard part of his rhetoric, but it's also, we've got these cringing toadies. The West Wing, the executive is entirely full of cringing toadies now. Because if they don't cringe, they're not just out of a job. They're ruined on social media. They have gun nuts show up at their door. So, gun nuts show up at their kids' school. So it's terror. They're locked in state. And it is now required rhetoric just in general in the West Wing to also say, yeah, you're the greatest president of all time. But he knows on some lizard level, some atavistic level, he knows that he's not. He knows that despite the fact that for 2 years his administration had control of everything on the federal, state, local, and municipal level of government anywhere in America, a greater degree of governmental control than anyone had seen in 100 years. Despite that fact, they've got almost nothing done. Because almost everything that this administration has proposed has either been botched in its conception or so flagrantly unethical that even a toady Congress wouldn't do it. And the long and the short of this digression here is that Trump is absolutely hot for a war. But it has to be right. It has to be provoked into it. It has to be a provoked war. He's hot for that. And especially his racist, fascist advisors they say that will renovate any president. That George W. Bush's approval ratings went up into 95 percentile in the immediate wake of 9/11. They don't seem to think. These people are all, as I've said before, they're all in a millenarian mind frame. They don't believe in a future. They don't believe in that there's going to be a future after they leave power. So none of them have spared a thought to what history has already done with George W. Bush. You wouldn't want to be him, despite those 95% approval ratings on September 12th. But anyway, I want to read you just the first 2 paragraphs of this story. Keep in mind, what we're talking about here is drone strikes on Saudi oil supply, which are being blamed by Mike Pompeo on Iran. Drone attacks claimed by Yemen's Houthi rebels struck 2 key oil installations inside Saudi Arabia on Saturday, damaging facilities that process the vast majority of the country's crude output and raising the risk of a disruption in world oil supplies. So a big deal. Will affect you in a week. The attacks immediately escalated tensions in the Persian Gulf amid a standoff between the United States and Iran, even as key questions remained unanswered. You're probably asking the first of those questions yourself. Our writers, to their credit, list it first. Where the drones were launched from, and how the Houthis managed to hit facilities deep inside Saudi territory, some 500 miles from Yemeni soil. This is a developing story. We'll probably read more about it next week, but I can tell you right now, they can't do that. The Yemenis can't do that. They can dream about it. They dream about it all night long, but they can't do it. They can't do it. They don't have the personnel, the technology, or the positioning to do it. Can you guess who does? Any idea who does have the ability to do that? Anybody? Any guesses as to who has the ability to give the Yemenis the ability to do that? What is the end result of this whoever, wherever from? What's the end result? You read it yourself in the first paragraph. To escalate tensions between Washington and Tehran. To move Washington and Tehran closer to war. And to make it look like Tehran's fault. I'm dreading it. I am absolutely dreading it. The idea of a third war in the Middle East, consecutive, boggles the mind. It just boggles the mind. But anyway, that was the front section of the paper. All of these stories jump they jump from their leaders at the front. They go on for pages you can read in great detail. It's one of the things I love about the New York Sunday Times. You have to keep your wits about you, of course. You can't be in a bubble. You can't be just taking them at their word. But there's a huge amount of material in here for $6. More material than you're going to get, and more variety than you get in a new book, which costs 10 times that much. So then there's a second section to the front section of the paper. It's expansions on the articles that are in the front section, and it's also the obituaries. And the obituary, I try to read the Sunday Times not so much to aggravate myself, but to give myself a little peace. The obituaries can ruin that. If you read an obituary you're not expecting of someone that you like, that can ruin that. And I read two this time around. Gene Edward Smith, the great biographer, he came up many times in my biography tour, has died. And also the novelist Anne Rivers Siddons has died. And she was never my cup of tea. I recommended her quite a bit to customers where I knew she was doing exactly what they wanted. And her novels featured... They featured the Rosamund Pilcher style combination of endearingly predictable plotting, so plotting that feels like that old worn sweater that just feels better than anything else in your wardrobe, and execrable prose. It was exactly that combination, and so I would have customers or friends and say, "I'm looking for something. I know exactly what I want. I want." Maeve Binchy. I want that kind of a feeling, that kind of a warm, ratty sweater feeling. That's what I'm in the mood for. I don't want to be pushed by a book. Instead, I want to settle in with characters who are going to feel like people that I know. And I would say, yes, there are a handful of authors who do that. It's no mean feat to do. It doesn't deserve anybody's condescension. It's a very hard thing to do. And Anne Rivers Siddons does it very well. So I'd say, in addition to a few other people, like, for instance, have you read all of Maeve Binchy? I can also recommend Anne Rivers Siddons, and invariably, the person that I was talking to would say, "Oh, really? Oh, that's great. So she's good?" And I would have to stop right there and say, "Yeah. You didn't ask for good, okay? No, she's not good. Let's not lose sight of that. She's not good. But she is exactly what you need right now. She's exactly what you described you want. You won't be disappointed. Even if the school teacher in you or the critical reader in you, there's a critical reader in all of us. I don't believe anything to the contrary. Just some people don't like to pay attention. Some people read, they don't want to read critically, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no wrong way to read. I would tell people, even though that critical reader way in the back of the bus is going to be saying, "Oh, God, that sentence," the part of you that is looking for this kind of thing is going to love it. And I never had anyone say otherwise, but that, "Oh, boy, you were right." On both sides, you were right. You were right on the money. And, Anne Rivers Siddons is another perfect example, as long as we're on the subject. She's another perfect example of a point that I make often on this channel, which is that there's money and book contracts in writing novels. And so a lot of people who are temperamentally, in my opinion, better suited to write nonfiction will write fiction and just keep writing fiction. And you can't do that. I mean, you can do it, but it's not going to be good. And that's your legacy. And Anne Rivers Siddons is a perfect example. She used to write columns. She used to love getting mail from fans, getting suggestions about columns, going for a walk and getting ideas for columns. And she collected them into what I think was her first book ever. I think it was the first thing she ever published, which was a collection of those things called John Chancellor Makes Me Cry. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. It's got all the strengths of her fiction and none of the weaknesses. But there was obviously no future in writing nonfiction, so she just moved on to novels. But anyway, that was the sad part of those, was that, two authors that each in their own way I liked, are no longer here. Then we get to the Sunday business section. My partner in tedium, David Murphy, who does a slog through the Wall Street Journal, he organizes his slogs in about the same way that I do, which is that he gets to the book section last, and he has an absolute treat. It's an absolute treat. It's a treat that unfortunately is behind a paywall, so quite a few of you won't have that treat, of getting to the Fiction Chronicle, which is a weekly column written by Sam Sachs, dissecting 3 or 4 or 1 modern contemporary novel. And every week, the subscribers to the Wall Street Journal get one of the best people who is able to do that alive today in that column. They just get to read that column. They just get to read him while he's doing that. It is quite obvious that he is not going to do that for his whole life. But right now, there are peaks and valleys in my profession. Of course, there are peaks and valleys. There are people who are really, really good, but very occasional. There are people who are really, really good and manage to pump out regular stuff. There are people who are perhaps less good, but extremely prolific. There are people who stink, of course. And then every once in a great while, there are probably 4 examples I can think of anywhere in the Western world of people who are really, really good and really, really regular. And the Fiction Chronicle is one of those examples, and David gets to get to that. But he didn't do a slog, a romp through the Wall Street Journal this week. So I figured I would at least glance at the business section. Ordinarily, I ignore it in the Times because I don't know anything about business. And of course, the front article, for some reason, in the business section, there was a long profile of Jane Goodall and her activism and her efforts to raise human awareness of the humanness, to use a phrase, of other species. I don't know what it's doing in the business section. Jane Goodall has, if anything, less business sense than I do. But I was happy to read it, but I don't know what it was doing there. It's probably a case of the jockeying of the endless jockeying of space that goes on behind the scenes at a print newspaper. Probably that piece was originally intended for some other section and just got crowded out. And so you go hat in hand to whoever might have space to give you. Ordinarily, in the bad old days that I come from, ordinarily that promise would be made with severe IOUs. It would be, all right, the sports dudes would say, all right, you can have half a page, but we're remembering it. And the next time we need something, we don't hear a peep from you, or we want to snatch something from you with your total agreement. But one way or another, the main article here is on a small startup company called Casper. They make mattresses. And they're branching out into all sorts of sleep coaching aids. All sorts of devices, gimcracks, gewgaws, and an advisory board designed to help you go unconscious for 10 hours every day. So there wasn't much in the business section. I don't know that probably David Murphy would have found a lot of far more wonky stuff to talk about. But we'll hope that he'll be back next time. And then the highlight of this Sunday New York Times was a series. I shouldn't say this. I should say always that the book review is the highlight, but there were a series of fold-out sections previewing art offerings in New York this coming fall. Film, TV, art, shows, theater. And they were, since they have an enormous amount of paid full-page ads, and since they have an enormous amount of color photography, they're on higher quality paper stock. There's no way you're going to be able to tell that in this video, but these are all just gigantic full-page color spreads of the stuff that's coming out on Broadway. That Just One Reader and I are going to have to spread these things out on the floor and just decide what we're going to see. We're going to have to decide what we're going to see. All the stuff we're going to see. One of the things looks particularly promising. So when he and I go to New York, we'll vlog the whole thing. And that is The Inheritance. Which is a play about 3 generations of growing up gay in New York. And looks really good. But look at this. I don't even be able to tell. I can't even show you the first one. This first section unfolds 4 times. to give you a gigantic color ad for the new Broadway incarnation of West Side Story. 4-page fold-out. You have any idea how much money that costs? In the Sunday New York Times. Good Lord. Then we have a full-page ad for To Kill a Mockingbird, which announces that Jeff Daniels is leaving. So you get a full-page ad, and then you get another 2 pages that Ed Harris is taking his place in early November. So that's going to cause... Jeff Daniels is sold out until November 3rd. Then Ed Harris takes over as Atticus Finch. That's 3 pages of color. Then there's another thing here, also 3 pages, I believe. There's a thing called Lehman, the Lehman trilogy. Yeah, you get this whole page, and then 2 whole-page spreads of something called the Lehman trilogy, which is about the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and is all. I'm sure that it's all going to be about. It's at the National Theater. I think it starts. It's 16 weeks only. It starts in late March. That's time enough for Juan and I to get our plane tickets all scrambled. And it's going to be about, I assume, the 2008 collapse of the American housing market, the Lehman Brothers collapse. It's a fantastic story. It's already been made into a few good movies. Then we have a 2-page spread for Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Big new production coming to Broadway. There's also a new Richard III that's coming to Broadway. We have a 2-page spread about the Book of Mormon. That's not new, but it's still packing them in. There's a thing called Slave Play, which is apparently a comedy musical that is also a heavyweight drama about the American slave experience. And then, in addition to the big page things, they also give you little breakdowns of all the stuff that's coming out, all of the big revivals. We have The Rose Tattoo, Tennessee Williams. Look at that, Marissa Tomei. Then this Betrayal, which has not only Tom Hiddleston, but also what's his name, Charlie Cox, who was Daredevil on the Marvel TV series Daredevil, and you could tell even when he was in Daredevil that he wanted to do other things. Then we have Moulin Rouge. Juan's probably going to want to see that because he's big into singing, but I can't stand Moulin Rouge. I know that I'm supposed to like it, but I can't stand it. It's an Adderall nightmare. It's just maybe they do it different on stage. I thought there was one other. This is just glorious. I mean, it's going to take me forever to go through. Yes, of course. This is Neil Simon's Plaza Suite, starring Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick. And Neil Simon's plays, I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, but they are ironclad. They are ironclad. They will still make you laugh. They will still make you laugh. Even now. How long has it been since Plaza Suite premiered? 60 years? Something like that? It's still funny. Neil Simon's his humor is that good. It's still funny. Anyway, let's jog things right along. We don't want the speed of the video to be as long as a David Murphy video. Okay. Then we get to the Sunday Review, which is the opinion section, the op-ed section. And as I've mentioned before, the op-ed section is Twitter. The op-ed section of a major newspaper is where you go to get the same combination of anal posturing and low information that you get anywhere on social media at any time. This is where you go to be frustrated. And this is where I go for Maureen Dowd, who is very frustrating. But there was something here that took frustrating to a whole new level. A whole new level. There's a full-page article on the inside. Keep in mind, this is in the opinion section. 8 sections back from the front of the paper. The title is, Brett Kavanaugh Fit In, She Did Not. The article is by Robin Pogrebin and Kate Kelly, and it is about a young woman named Deborah Ramirez who was sexually harassed by Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh when they were both at school, when they were both in college. And I'm not going to describe the nature of that harassment, but it was graphic, and it was repeated, and it was grotesque. And you may be wondering, well, who on earth is Deborah Ramirez? Remember Dr. Blasey Ford? She was the very frightened person who stood up in front of Congress to talk about her memories about being sexually harassed by this guy and his friends. And it was Anita Hill all over again. It was Anita Hill all over again. It was a bunch of men up on the dais saying, well, you don't seem to remember. You don't seem to have any genetic samples. Young lady, are you telling us the truth? Who's a fine, upstanding man? Are you trying to... It was just that all over again. For those of us who had remembered the Anita Hill hearings, it was... Anyway, Brett Kavanaugh got confirmed by a whisker, by 2 people. he got confirmed. And he is now a justice on the Supreme Court. That is a lifetime appointment, but it is not invulnerable. He can be impeached. Justices can lose their jobs. And you might be wondering, well, okay, I remember Dr. Blasey Ford. I remember her absolutely gut-wrenching testimony where you hear it and you think, okay, she's a little vague on some of the details, but this is obviously something that happened to her. Something really happened, and it really involved this guy. So, at least we should be examining. At least we should be conducting a full-scale investigation, bringing people forward, finding out if there's corroboration. At least we should be doing that. There's cause here. It's obvious that she's not an opportunist. You remember her, but you don't remember Deborah Ramirez. Well, there's a good reason for that. And it gets to, we have to go 1, 2, 3, 10, 12, 15 paragraphs in. Ms. Ramirez's legal team gave the FBI a list of at least 25 individuals who may have had corroborating evidence, corroborating her account of Brett Kavanaugh sexually harassing her. 25 individuals who may have had corroborating evidence, but the Bureau, in its supplemental background investigation, interviewed none of them. Not 5, not 2, none. They interviewed none of these people. Though we learn many of these potential witnesses tried in vain to reach the FBI on their own. 2 FBI agents interviewed Ms. Ramirez, telling her that they found her credible, but the Republican-controlled Senate had imposed strict limits on the investigation. We have to wait to get authorization to do anything else, one of Ramirez's lawyers recalled the agent saying. It was almost a little apologetic. It should have been a lot apologetic. 25 individuals. In other words, there were individuals who corroborated Christine Blasey Ford. Plenty. There was plenty enough corroboration there to warrant putting this on hold, or even, God forbid, withdrawing his nomination. There are, as people had on social media at the time pointed out, there is a long list of a-holes who are eager to get on the Supreme Court and start stripping women of their rights. There's a long list of such people. If the Republican Party really wants to impanel someone like that, they've got a lot of people to choose from who don't have credible allegations of sexual abuse in their background. And it turns out that what some of us might have suspected during those hearings was absolutely true. She wasn't alone. There were lots of other people, lots of them, with credible witnesses, lots of corroboration, who knows, maybe physical evidence, that not only did we never hear about, the fact the FBI never investigated to get this particular a-hole on the court. So, what happens now? First of all, I want to know, what happens now? Has the Republican-controlled Senate become so debased that this means nothing? They're not going to do anything at all about the fact that now this guy has a rack of credible accusations against his name. That's question number 1. Question number 2, almost as pressing, what on earth is this doing in the opinion section of the paper? What on earth is this story doing 10 sections back in the opinion section of the paper? Why isn't it on the front page? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. But at long last, we reach the book review. And the book review starts off frustrating. Laura Miller has the front page of the book review is a review of The Institute by Stephen King. And that is frustrating. You can tell from the first paragraph of the thing. It goes on. It jumps to the center of the review. You can tell from the first paragraph that it's going to be just an indiscriminate praise of a book that's really bad. Really, really bad. And it is. So the book review lets you down right away. But we get to the Buy the Book section. In this case, it's Imani Perry, who wrote a really good biography of Lorraine Hansberry, one of the titans of the Harlem Renaissance, called Looking for Lorraine. It's really, really good. And she also wrote a little book, sort of a memoir to her sons about what they will face growing up in a racist country, in a country that is actually more racist now than it's been in a long time. Ordinarily, a book that fits that description. What was that book called? Breathe, A Letter to My Sons. Ordinarily, a book that fits that description would annoy me right out of the gate. I cannot stand the kind of sanctimony that is, I guess, a natural response to the increased rabid racism in this country. And I can't stand the broad brush approach. I don't want to have to, in order to read such a book, by Imani Perry or Ta-Nehisi Coates or whoever, I don't want to have to, at the door, agree that I'm a racist. I'm not. And I don't agree, I don't like that at all, that a social justice, progressive, quote-unquote intellectual can call me one because of the tone of my skin. That makes you a racist, not me. And I don't like that having to be the thing that I admit at the starting gate before I can even enjoy these books. And I was expecting that in Breathe, and I didn't get it. Breathe is beautiful. Just beautifully done. Incredibly done. So I was looking forward to her buy the book. This is where the New York Times asked authors a certain set of questions. And I wasn't disappointed. The answers are delightful. When she's asked what books are on your nightstand, she says the pile is embarrassingly high. A lot of you can identify with that. She is asked, what's the last great book you read? And she mentions, the very first thing that she mentions is Min Jin Lee's Pachinko, which is one of those novels that's been increasing in my estimation the more it sits in the back of my mind, the way fiction does. I think it might be a really good novel, and certainly it had a huge amount of praise on BookTube. And then one thing that irritated, a tiny bit of irritation out of the stumbling gate here was that they asked her, are there any classic novels that you recently read for the first time? And she mentions Blindness by Jose Saramago, whose corpse is still warm. Blindness is not a classic. We've been over this on this channel before. In addition to, classic is a label that doesn't just refer to literary quality. It also refers to staying power. I wouldn't doubt at all that Saramago is a classic author, but you can't say that now. You can't call him that now. But I liked it anyway. I liked the description of encountering Saramago and realizing, oh my God, this is really good, and I hadn't known it. That's a wonderful feeling. I love that feeling. She's asked to describe her ideal reading experience, and she says, I love to read in a comfortable chair, sitting in front of an open window while it is raining, preferably a torrential rain. The scent, the breeze, and a book. A perfect combination. Who doesn't agree with that? It was all along in this by the book. I'm nodding and nodding. You might be wondering, oh my God, is she going to say something wrong? And she does. Oh, BookTube, she does. But let's do a couple of other good ones first before we get to those. Let's see here. They ask her what her favorite book to assign to her Princeton students is, and she says W.E.B. Du Bois is The Soul of Black People, of Black Folk, is the gift that keeps on giving, and I would agree with that. Let's see here. Oh, here, okay. They ask her what moves you most in a work of literature, and she says the feeling of astonishment. Being knocked off kilter is what makes me vulnerable as a reader. Vulnerability is the key for me to be deeply affected by the story. I love that. To be knocked off kilter, to go in maybe expecting something and just get just totally unbalanced. I love that. But it's not all peaches and cream, BookTube, because she's asked, it's going to be painful even to read this. She's asked, disappointing, overrated, or just not good. What book did you feel as if you were supposed to like but didn't? And she says, every time I try to read a Jane Austen novel, it feels like a terrible slog to me. I'm not engaged by books which I think of as, quote, parlor people literature. Austen and Henry James are the two literary greats whose books I just don't like at all. And I wanted to scream. You all went through the mandatory read-along on this channel of Pride and Prejudice. Does Lizzie Bennet strike you as parlor people? No, that is just not right. That is her looking at the book through movies instead of it. It is just not right. Even Darcy is not parlor people. The minute we get to know him, you realize what a roiling morass of insecurities he is. The closest thing that Pride and Prejudice gets to what I think Imani Perry is thinking of when she thinks of parlor people is Mr. Collins. And he's a figure of derision. I have to hope that she will go back to Pride and Prejudice at some point and reclaim it. I have to hope that. But anyway, Marilyn Stasio does a roundup of crime novels. That's always fun. Hannah Beach does a very good, smart review of We the Survivors by Tash Ah. And Blair Braverman, who is a dog sledder, a correspondent for Outside Magazine, and the author of Welcome to the Goddamn Ice Cube, does a nice long review of Ian Urbina's The Outlaw Ocean, which I read, I reviewed it, I loved it. Really, really good stuff. Also, Aminata Forna, who's fantastic. Her latest book is Happiness. If you haven't read it, you really ought to give it a try. She does a short, it's only half a page. She does a review of Everything Inside, the new story collection by Edwidge Danticat, which I thought was really, really good. Maybe my favorite thing by Edwidge Danticat. And the review is really good, too. Really, really good. Then there is, we're going way long here, so we'll wrap this up. Caitlin Phillips, who writes for Bookforum. She's a frequent critic for Bookforum. She does a nice, long, full-page review of Rachel Monroe's Savage Appetites, about the appetite that women have for true crime stories, both reading them and writing them. It's a very, very good review, but I have to say, it's not as good as the one that Olive from A Book Olive did for Open Letters Review. So if I remember, I will leave a link to her review down below. There's a half-page review by Martin Riker, who did Samuel Johnson's Eternal Return, a book I kind of sort of liked, but I don't think we ever saw it on this channel. He teaches at Washington University in St. Louis, but there's a little bit of Brooklyn wherever his feet touch the ground. His book was very Brooklyn, and he is very Brooklyn. And he does a half-page review of Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellman that manages to do quite a bit in half a page. I was kind of impressed. The book it's a BookTube darling. You can see copies of it up there, and it's enormously long, and it's generating think pieces as we speak. I'm sure that the publisher, Biblioasis, is going to be thrilled, over the moon, that it got a positive review in the New York Sunday Times book review. I was happy to see. I was happy to see that. I wish that it had been the front page review instead of Stephen King. Stephen King's The Institute does not in any way deserve the attention, and Stephen King would be the first, I think, to admit that he doesn't need it. Imagine how much more euphoric Biblioasis and Lucy Ellman would be if Ducks Newburyport had been the front page of the book review. And then there's a Catherine Hong, who's a contributor to Elle, Decor, and blogs about children's books. She does a roundup of YA novels, new YA novels. It's a very good roundup. So much so that as I was reading along, I was thinking, okay, I don't really know your writing, but I know right away that you are a critic I can trust. I won't necessarily take your word as gospel, but you're serious about this, so I have to contend with what you say. And I was hoping, I was reading that, the first column of the thing, I was thinking, okay, well, given that fact, I'm hoping you don't trash anything I like. And she does. She does. She reviews Mary Choi's novel Permanent Record, which we saw on this channel and I praised on this channel, and says that it falls a little flat. But that's the kind of disagreement that I like. If a critic is going to if they're going to dish something that I liked, if they're going to do it smartly, then I'm going to listen. I'm absolutely. And then the last thing I want to mention is Nora Krug, who did a graphic novel recently about being German in the current day. She has an illustrated back page about reading Mein Kampf, but finally reading Mein Kampf, and it was really good. But the thing mentioned in the course of it is that in Germany there is a 2,000-page annotated Mein Kampf that is designed to look like a Talmud, and it is brilliant. I've heard so many great things about this edition, and what I want, what I've wanted for years, is for that edition to get an English language translation and be immediately a Penguin Classic. Have that Mein Kampf go into schools. Have that Mein Kampf be the one stacked in bookstores. Also, I would like to read it. I haven't screwed up my courage to buy the German edition. I want to see that edition in America. I want to see it in English. I'd love it if it were a nice, big Penguin Classic. Penguin Classics don't only commemorate virtuous books, right? There's plenty of awful stuff. But even if it's not Penguin Classic, I'd like a big publisher to do it, like Viking or W.W. Norton. Bring it out in a big edition, gigantic, and let's just talk about it. Let's just face it squarely in this, what sounds like a magnificent work of scholarship. Maybe someday. But anyway, that was the Sunday Times book review. Oh my God. And the Sunday Times, just in general. Some ups, some downs, but it was a lot of fun to go through it with you, and I went through every word of it. Not just planning out my long week in New York with Juan from Just Juan Reader, but also reading all the reviews, checking all the news, making mental notes of the stories that are going to unfold in the upcoming week. So much fun. And it's my news for the day. I'm not going to touch the news again for the rest of the day, which is great. That's an added bonus. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.